Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cross-Border Dialogues. I see some of you folks joining in, and we're just going to wait a little bit for folks to click on that link and tune in, and we'll get started shortly. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for Cross-Border Dialogues, a series organized by the Art Gallery of Guelph and by Sally Frater, curator Sally Frater. This is the second in a series of conversations, and we're thrilled to have with us, joining us this evening, Dr. Kelli Morgan and Julie Crooks. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. My name is Nicole Bufeld, and on behalf of the Art Gallery of Guelph, again, I want to welcome you all. And I thought I would start our time together here by suggesting a moment of reflection to contemplate the place where we're gathering, even if it's virtually this evening, but for each of us to contemplate the land on which we each live, work, and create. And I'll do so on behalf of the Art Gallery of Guelph here, and also on behalf of myself. So as a second generation Canadian of Eastern European background, I recognize that I've been granted privileges to live on this land, and I have access on this land and within society that others may not experience. And so I often remind myself that land acknowledgements need to be and must be much more than that. To be grateful for the place where I live and work and create, and also that it's important to confront colonialism and the colonial structures that impact people's everyday realities. Also, as a cultural institution, as a gallery, much of what we do is about representation. And of course, the history that museums and galleries are based on a history of deeply colonial methods of representation, and continue to operate within these systems and structure. And so because of the ways that we operate, because of our role within traditional educational systems, it's really important for us to continually confront the very real present experiences of colonialism, both that impact the structures of our society, but also that are alive and well and create conflict and struggle and strife and real challenges for individuals around the world. And so today, I'd like to share that the place that the Art Gallery of Guelph is situated, this place we now call Guelph, Ontario, it's on the ancestral lands of the Attawanshan people and on Treaty 3 territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land, of course, has a long and deep history and has been home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for generations. But also is home to these peoples today and will be for generations to come. So I invite you in joining me in offering our respect for Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors, recognizing that there's much work to do to strengthen our relationships within this community. And I invite you in joining me in offering respect for the elders of this land of the past, present, and future, doing so with gratitude and intention and towards reconciliation. So again, Cross-Border Dialogues is a series of conversations between arts programmers and professionals based both in Canada and the United States. This is the brainchild of former Art Gallery of Guelph curator Sally Frater, who has brought together folks from across the border to have these conversations, to talk about the philosophies that inform their work, their methods of engagement, pedagogy, community outreach, this role of mentorship within their work, and approaches to representation and programming within and beyond the histories of our institutions. It's a wonderful series, and as one of our last presenters said, Sally has a way of being able to bring together folks professionally, almost like a professional matchmaker. So I should say a matchmaker for professionals. And even in the short conversation that we had beforehand, I can see that this is true in the way that it's wonderful to see how people connect. And I'm looking forward to the conversation that unfolds today. I should say also that we're really lucky to have some very generous funders for cross-border dialogues. And this series is supported by the Canada Council for the Arts, the Guelph Community Foundation, and is presented by the Art Gallery of Guelph. So I'll do a brief intro for Sally. She will introduce our speakers. There's of course time for questions, so please do throw those in the chat, and I will work with Sally to make sure that we attend to those as well. Sally Frater is the daughter of immigrants of the Caribbean. She is now the senior curator and curatorial manager at the Remy Modern in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and previously she was the curator of contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Guelph. Curatorially, she is interested in decolonial praxis, space and place, Black and Caribbean diasporas, photography, art of the everyday, and issues of equity and representation in museological spaces. I will say as a side note that getting to work alongside Sally, I've learned so much, and she does curate beautiful shows. So I'm looking forward to seeing what she works on at the Remy. She's also created solo and group exhibitions at institutions such as the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Art Gallery of Guelph, the Ulrich Museum of Art, the Glassell School of Art, and at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, the Justina M. Barnacky Gallery at the University of Toronto, Project Row Houses and Earth3 for artistic and social practice, and many. So, see.
Well, thank you, Nicole, for that lovely introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am joining you from Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homelands of the Métis here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I'm really excited about tonight's dialogue, which features the speakers Julie Crooks and Kelli Morgan. One of the things that we don't really explain in the preamble about this series is that it's an opportunity to pair. This is a pilot project, first of all, and it's an opportunity to pair speakers who are based in Canada and in the US, people who are working in similar areas, to come together and have the opportunity to think through their curatorial practice, to kind of reflect on their career to date, and to kind of think about their separate paths that they want to chart moving forward. So tonight's speakers, as I mentioned, they work in similar yet distinct areas of curatorial practice. Separately, it could be argued that they both probe the ways in which Blackness unfolds within the space of the institution. I feel that describing their work in that way is somewhat reductive, but hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation that will illuminate all of the things that they do in their really remarkable practices. Crooks does this within a global African and Black diasporic experience, or through looking at that or examining that, and Morgan mainly within the realm of representations of Blackness as seen through the lens of African American experience. Julie Crooks is curator arts of global African and the diaspora at the Art Gallery of Ontario. She holds a PhD from the Department of History of Art and Archaeology at the School of Oriental and African Studies. They need to change that name. But anyway, we'll move forward. The University of London, UK. Joining the AGO in 2017, she has curated a number of significant exhibitions, including Free Black North in 2017, Micheline Thomas, Femme Noire in 2018, and presentations from the permanent collection, such as Photograph, the 1920s to the 1940s, Women in Focus, that ran from 2019 to 2020, Fragments of Epic Memory from 2021 to 2022, and she recently oversaw the Tate Britain's Life Between Islands, British Caribbean Art from the 1950s to now. That exhibition is currently up at the AGO, so people can go and see it. She has actively participated in bringing works by Black artists into the AGO's collection, most notably the Montgomery collection of Caribbean photographs, which was acquired in 2019. She has maintained an active presence outside of the AGO. She curated Here We Are, she co-curated the exhibition Here We Are Here, Black Canadian Contemporary Art at the Royal Ontario Museum in 2018. And she is also a founding board member of Black Artists Network in Dialogue, or BAND, where she also curated many exhibitions, including Ears, Eyes, Voices, Black Canadian photojournalists from the 1970s to the 1990s, which was mounted in 2017. And she is a founding member of the Black Curators Forum, which launched in 2019 to advocate for and support Black curators working in Canada. And Dr. Kelli Morgan is the recently appointed senior curator at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan. Over the last decade, her scholarly commitment to the investigation of anti-Blackness within American art and visual culture has demonstrated how traditional art history and museum practice works specifically to uphold white supremacy. Apart from her own curatorial experience, she mentors emerging curators and regularly trains staff at various museums to foster best practices in collections management, exhibitions, community engagement, and fundraising. She is a leading and influential voice in furthering museum practice and has previously held positions at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, at Newfields, the Birmingham Museum of Art, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. So thank you both for agreeing to do this. I think we're going to begin with the very straightforward question: what drew you to curating, and how did you get started in the field? Julie, do you want to start?
I mean, I know in the interest of time, I guess we'll be quite sort of the long stories. Very simply, I was always interested in art, especially photography. I come from a family where art was really important. It was in the house. I had an aunt that was an avid museum goer, as was my parents. And somehow I was always kind of curious and interested in just the visual. And by some kind of osmosis, I guess, I parlayed that interest into becoming, I guess, a curator.
Yeah, I had a long arc, in a way too, Julie. Like I typically say I came to the field through the back door when nobody was looking, right? Right. In this similar way, like, art was present in the home, not so much fine art, more like dark decorative art. My mother was a Willowware and a Wedgwood collector. But as a kid, like I didn't know much about that work. It was like, in my mind, it was like, oh, mom's blue and white stuff, that kind of thing. And as I made my way through graduate school and sort of into art history from a Black studies foundation, it was like, oh, here's this gap, in between the two disciplines. And then, in discovering people who were filling that gap. So it's like I discovered Deb Willis and Richard Powell and, Lisa Farrington and those folks. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. Like, how does one teach in a museum? Or how do you turn a classroom into a gallery kind of thing? Or how do you expand the classroom wall? And that's really how I found myself, coming to the field, just having these questions about like, who are these people and how does one become a museum curator, and getting a lot of like, I don't know, but if you figure it out, I'll support you kind of answer.
It's very interesting you say that, because I know there's a question about mentorship later on.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but I often, if I'm in the gallery and there's particularly a group of students of color, Black students, as I'm doing a tour or answering questions, one of those questions is, how do you do this? How do you become a curator? So it's interesting the way you just kind of retold your story, that is often the story, the question that we are both, I guess, now being asked. So it's kind of full circle in a way.
Yeah. And I actually was hoping that you could both speak a bit more about your respective journeys into working into curatorial practice, because you both pursued PhDs. And correct me if I'm wrong, like Julie, I know that you did a lot of independent curatorial work before finding your way into galleries. And Kelli, you did a number of fellowships and I believe internships in different spaces. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that a bit more. Like, when you were doing your PhD, was it with the intent of working in an institution, or was it just to further your knowledge and to see what might happen afterwards?
For me, it definitely was, because it was basically like I was in a master's program here in Detroit at Wayne State, was trying to study Black women's intellectual history, was getting a lot of pushback, from my white faculty. And I had two, white faculty in history who were like, that's not true. But as an undergrad coming out of Black studies, I knew that wasn't true. And I worked at Wayne State. So I was like, well, I'm enrolled in the program. Let me see. I've always wanted to take this African American art history course. It had been, on Wayne State's books for decades. And I said, I'm gonna take it, but I'm gonna take it at the graduate level. And it blew my mind, right? Like, like, oh yeah, Romare Bearden and Jacob Lawrence. And then it was like, oh, this other history. And I was like, how have I not known this? So when I applied to graduate school at UMass in Black Studies, I actually applied with my Black women's intellectual history work, research, because I was like, they're not gonna let me in. I'm talking about Elizabeth Catlett and Betty Starr, right? So I got in, and what I did is I started my coursework in Black Studies. Black Studies is very it's either lit or politics and history, right? And so there were these two tracks. So what I wound up doing is I would weave, Black art, Black artists, Black visual practice into whatever I was writing about. So, for an example, I remember my 19th century Black literature course, and we were reading Pauline Hopkins and Julia C. Collins and, Charles Chestnut and all these Black 19th century writers who were writing about Black women's interior design practices and, sewing circles, right? That kind of thing. So I talked about it, as traditions of Black women's craft, and pulling out the quilting scene and why, how this leads to fashion design and all that kind of stuff. So I would do, my 20th century class, I wrote about Elizabeth Catlett and Margaret Walker, who were besties in college, right? So by the time I got to my second year, my professors was like, what is all of this art stuff? That was not in her letter, when she applied. And when they sat down, they bring you in and give you your grades. And I said, yeah, I knew you guys weren't gonna let me in, if I told you that I really, want to be an art curator. And the response, and this is what's so beautiful about the cultural studies, right? The response was, okay, we have no idea how to help you, get a museum job. But if you can figure it out, we will support you the entire way. And it was and once I got that, okay, then I just started to reach out to people and apply for things. And I didn't get everything, but it kind of went from there.
So interesting, because I too have a very kind of circuitous route, non-linear for sure pathway. Um, I was an English major. Actually, I was a dance major, then English major, did my master's in English. But like you, I don't think I was actually interested in being a curator. I was just interested in learning about art. So I too would um, make sure that my course load would always have, a significant amount of visual art courses. So, early or kind of overview courses on Canadian art. And I don't think at the time at York University there was um, I think I did a lot of independent courses. You know, how you could go to a
Yeah.
professor and say, I'm
Yes.
interested in
Mhm.
this, the history of photography, because I'd gotten Deb Willis's book, of course, and
Yeah.
was definitely an inspiration. So I want to learn more about this. How do I do this? And I had some amazing art, photographers, professors who would say, "Well, build your own syllabus, and then
Syllabus.
we'll
Yeah.
meet, and then you'll talk, and you'll write an essay." And I found that really formative, actually, in terms of um, beginning to think about, well, what can I, how do I parlay this into a career? Not really thinking, I was actually thinking about, well, maybe I become a professor, I do a PhD and I teach art history. Um, but really it was that the kind of freedom to create my own way of learning in a very non-traditional way, I would say, because I learned everything. It was photography, it was,
Yep.
of course, Bearden, it was, modernism, it was Canadian, and I
Same,
everything.
same
Um,
story.
but I
Yeah.
think it benefit if I think back on it now, if I reflect, I think actually that was actually a good way of doing it, of
It
being,
was.
I wasn't kind of married to a particular area um,
Mhm.
or medium, right? It allowed me to really explore. And I was really interested in African art. That's why I decided to go to. It's now SOAS, not the School of Oriental and African Studies. So thankfully, they've changed it. But then I could really kind of concentrate on African art, photography, etc. So that was kind of how I navigated at least academia.
Yeah, I did a similar thing where I did like an extra year of coursework that was just independent studies,
Mm-hmm.
including that summer. So it was all 3 semesters for that exact reason, Julie. And
Yeah.
I talk to students about this all the time because I think they see us, like our entire constituency, right? You
Yeah.
too, Sally, like there's a critical mass of us now.
Yeah.
And this idea is that I can just go to school and do this. And then they get to the programs and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't exist. Right.
Yeah.
It like even with us being out here
Yeah.
in these jobs and has gaining the visibility, doing the show, like we all have had to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Um and it's like so fat, like how they glaze over sometimes, when I'm just like, yeah, you got to do it. Like
Yeah.
nobody's gonna do it for you. Nobody, like you can reach out to people who will be happy to help you, but at the end of the day, you have to figure it out. So I always tell them to like know their why. Because for me, it was very similar. It was like because I knew kind of what I wanted to do.
Mm.
I was just piecing it together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit.
Mm.
When you when you each first began curating in an institutional setting, were there things that you encountered that surprised you or that were unexpected? Did you feel that there was this chasm between what you had studied and how you had thought that you would approach your work and how it actually was?
Yeah, I call it the exotic chicken syndrome, right? Where like I would be in meetings and we would be discussing sometimes an exhibition, sometimes a work of art. you know, sometimes it's an internal, right, situation, and the situation is clearly a duck, right? Right. And or it's clearly this one thing. And everybody is in the room is like, oh no, like it's this new genetically modified chicken, and you're like, I swear that's a duck. No matter of fact, that's a mallard duck. Like the head is green, you know what I'm saying? Like it is clearly a duck. And I thought that was the most bizarre situation. And then as I moved, institution to institution, and got the language for gaslighting and all that, and I was like, oh, this is what's happening. So I started talking about like this Twilight Zone, reality, like where people will literally lie to your face, about, an iPhone, and they will say it's a television, right? Well, it kind of is, right? But it was so weird. And so I was like, okay, well, if these folks, and I'm just gonna be frank, like if like white folks are having this amount of issue being honest with themselves about themselves in spaces that they are privileged and basically control, what could you possibly know about Black culture, right? In any kind of significant way. So that like got me on, this is how I got into the anti-whiteness work, right? And anti-racist work, because it's like the work that I actually set out to do, this actual reality, of, traditionally white institutions just didn't allow me to do, right? The work that I wanted to do. Because I could see, and then I was like, oh, this is how white supremacy functions in the visual sphere, right? This is how museums as colonial spaces maintain like the culture war. So I'm in this space as a Black woman, degreed in Black studies, taught by activists. I'm from Detroit, right? Right. So I'm also coming from a very particular background, and I was like, I got to do something about it. So I started to actually attack it, from the root, and it just kind of went from there. But it was so people always say like, oh, you're just so open, you're so transparent. And I was just like, yeah, because I didn't really know how else to address it. Like I just couldn't fall into like the lie of it all, and how obvious it was.
Yeah, I mean, oh my goodness, bringing back memories, unwanted memories, Kelly. Um, uh,
Sorry.
Interesting. The AGO was really the first institutional job that I have had. I was working really independently. That's not to say that I didn't have some association with the institution. Growing up in Toronto, as a young person, as I said, my parents took me to museums, including, the AGO and the ROM, et cetera. I would say it was never a welcoming place. So fast forward for Black people, you didn't see it on the walls. You didn't see. Maybe you saw the coat check person, who I happen to know actually was a Caribbean woman, but certainly not the staff, and I definitely not curatorial until much later. There was a curator before me. And then fast forward a little bit, they have it's a small African collection, but quite significant. And there was a new gallery that was built to display this collection. And there was a kind of community advisory, kind of struck academic scholars, curators. And I took I participated in that discussion. What is this new gallery going to look like? How is Africa going to be deployed? In this, again, very, very white space. And that collection had been there for a while. So there, I had some relationships with the institution, but not working within it. There was a very large Basquiat retrospective, also another community group. There was always this, you can offer your advice and opinions and suggestions for free, maybe a membership, but you know, you ain't getting hired, until I was hired. And even before I was hired in 2017. I guess I kind of tested the waters by um, uh, guest curating. So I had an idea. It was related to the kind of sesquicentennial celebrations of, you know, Canada's founding, and it was just a small show of tintypes, photographs of Black subjects who were descendants of those who came through the Underground Railroad, freedom seekers, and end up in southwestern Ontario. So there are two different archives, photo archives that, you know, this work was pulled from. So it gave me a taste of what it would be like to work in an institution. But it's different when you are guest curating, because you are, you know, quite autonomous, right? You don't have the kinds of pressures and relationships. You're kind of in and out. So there wasn't anything really untoward in terms of that experience. Then I was hired. And I think also my age, you know, I wasn't like a young woman. I'd worked before in other areas. So I was really prepared, I think. I thought, oh, I should say, I thought I was prepared um, uh, until you get in the system and realize, um, well, first you're the only one, and all the pressure of representing, um, you know, Blackness and community, uh, all of the labor that entails is then foist on you.
Yeah.
And you know, so that kind of navigation I found very difficult, except for the fact that I had colleagues who were very supportive. So, you know, the system isn't supportive. The structure, of course, is absolutely not, um, it is repressive, actually, and rigid. But sometimes there are people in the, you know, you find allies that help you, because if not, it is absolutely not sustainable. And the experience of my former colleague, the only other, you know, Black curator that was at this institution, you know, kind of presented that case very, very clearly. So, so yeah, that was my kind of entree into the institution. So I've only worked at one institution so far.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking when I was preparing for this discussion, you know, when you realize things, but you kind of slowly are realizing things, but they crystallize at a particular moment. And so then I was thinking that for a lot of institutions, although they may have had departments of African art, they weren't necessarily led by Black curators. But the other thing is that they often, these departments of, like, I'm just going to call them Black art, although they're never titled as such, that this is a relatively new phenomenon.
Yep.
And I was thinking about what that means to be usually just one person in an institution kind of doing that work, where historically there hasn't really been that precedent and what that means. So I was thinking that it just kind of like struck me for the first time that there are so many of us, and Kelly, as you were saying, like there are so many people working in the field now, but there are still firsts, right? Like this was something that came up in another area where there's still like first. And Julie, you weren't the first, but you were the first to head this department. And you've kind of touched on this, and Kelly, you alluded to this as well, like the kind of like burden of responsibility that
Yeah.
you feel in that role. And so then I'm kind of like, since you've been doing this work for a while, how do you not now define what your responsibilities are like within this role? And also, what do you feel in terms of doing this work, what falls under the purview of the institution? And are these kind of separate endeavors that you're embarking on? Like, are there shared responsibilities? Are there things where you're kind of like, this is where I leave you, institution, and this is where you are supposed to pick up this?
I mean, I was definitely the first at all of my institutions. And it really, things started to turn, because much like you were saying, Julie, like I had extremely supportive colleagues across the board at Birmingham. And then I got to PAFA, same thing, you know, really supportive colleagues, but a very like hostile administration, right? But I was so naive. So it was like the way he did it was so paternalistic, right? So it was almost like too late, right? Before I had figured out like what he was actually doing. But it was at PAFA, you know, that as I started to kind of come into the like sort of light bulb, you know, rose colored glasses coming out. And I was like, I noticed the tokenization. So what I did is I kind of went back to Birmingham because I was like, oh my God, it was tokenization in Birmingham too. Had no idea. So I started to mine in like very Toni Morrison theory of like remembering, right? From The Bluest Eye, right? And I think she's talking to Sephra and she's like, you know, the memory is there like waiting for you. So I mine, again, this is another thing about being trained in Black studies and not our history, right? So I mined my own memories of like really uncomfortable dinner parties, right? Like how I felt every time the director at BMA at the time would say, this is Kelli and we're so glad to have her because she is so smart, right? Isn't she just so smart, you know? And just all the racist things, right? You know, we used to have this party called Art on the Rocks for like, you know, young working professionals. And I don't think he was a board member, but he was a pretty high level donor that was a part of our contemporary art circle, who like, you know, hit me on, you know, just basically kind of grazed me, you know, on the butt. And that moment when I cozied up to him, you know, to kind of like grab the back of his shirt, right? And I like twisted it up. You know, like around his collar. And I was like, if you ever touch me like that again, I will break your effing arm. You know, so it was like, I started thinking about that stuff. And I was like, what would I do differently now? So what I started to do at PAFA is I would allow the tokenization for particular parties with particular folks around the city that I needed to meet. So you want to show off your, you know, your smart little Black curatorial fellow, great, as long as I can meet Mrs. So-and-so, because I know she does this after school program, right? That I would really like to be involved in, blah, 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 blah. The second thing that I did, and then I'll stop here, is I stopped allowing, because all of that responsibility is foisted on you, I would no longer allow the institution to tell me how to show up. Right. So that was the moment that I stopped code switching. You know, that was the moment where I stopped the whole like business casual thing. Right. You know, I started to stand very firm, you know, and very much more firmly, like in sort of my Black like hood identity. And didn't really care how anybody felt about it, you know, because if I'm going to be here, you know, and this is what you're going to do, right? And I know I actually know more than you read about this. I'm actually going to teach it. I'm going to curate it. I'm going to narrate it, right? I'm going to tour it however I want to, you know, and that was very, I think, off-putting, you know, for a lot of people, but it was also really empowering for the students because I didn't care, right? How off-putting it was, you know, for the administration and some of the faculty. And I really started to own that, you know, so that by the time I got to Newfields, by the time I got to Indianapolis, and still to this day, it like blows my mind that people are surprised, when I show up. Like I said, I have been showing up like this for 10 years. Like, I don't know, but going back to what you were saying, Julie, like the pressure, it's like this idea that we're just going to conform, or we're just going to fold. And I'll take my breaks, but I'm constantly like adamantly, about being my authentic self. I'm like, I'm not getting ready to present Blackness in a way that make the white folks comfortable, because I'm like, white people are the only people on the planet that want to talk about genocide and slavery and just all of this sordid stuff in like rosy language to make you feel good. We talking about millions of people that you have murdered. Like, that ain't a feel good subject next time you ask me, or anybody else, right? It's like, that also is like a psychosis. So I kind of stopped adhering, right, to those like politically correct sort of false sense of universality, right, and assimilation. And I just kind of put my Blackness all the way on and never took it back off, right? Because you know how that happens. It's like, because we can take it off, take it off and put it on in particular ways. And I was just like, oh no, I'm not doing that no more.
Well, that's a mic drop. I mean, how do I? You've said it all. The burden of representation, being your authentic self. I don't know how to take off and put back on Blackness. I mean, I am who I am when I walk into a room. If that's the gallery space, a boardroom, the restaurant attached to the institution, the library, whatever it is, I am who I am. And I think I made it very clear during my interview for my first position at the AGO. You kind of get who you get, and because I find it, Sally knows this about me. I wear it on my face. I am not able to fix my face. And so if I can't fix my face, it means I can't fix my tongue and I can't fix
Same.
my thoughts. And I feel at this age and stage that I need to express whatever it is, however uncomfortable it's going to make you, I need to be able to express it. So I think the question about what does the institution, what do they have to do? What is on them and what is on me? My job is to curate. My job is to bring my community into the building. Hopefully it's a warm and welcoming, experience. Hopefully they see themselves on the wall, in a video, in a sculpture, whatever it is. And their job is to support me. And in between that, we know, as you've just eloquently laid out, is the messiness of typical white supremacy, the inability to never ever kind of give us that break. You know what I mean? Like there's always that pressure. I understand that pressure, and when I say it, I say this in a very general way, but it's in the way you interact with donors, as you just said. That's a whole. And I have always refused to perform.
Mm-hmm.
I can't perform. And nowadays, it really is about whose funds am I willing to take to help with an acquisition, with an exhibition, et cetera. I mean, it's now that, intentional and clear. Because again, as you said, that authenticity, without that, what do you have? What is the purpose? What is your purpose and role? And how, and if you're talking about mentorship, how do young Black women and men who are coming into this field, how do you guide them, if not from a very authentic place? And I know it's difficult. I mean, what you've just described is what we all, I think, have to um, navigate, grapple with, take care of ourselves as we're trying to do all of this, because it's not easy work. I think
No.
you've just, again, the mic drop. It is not easy work, and so yeah, I think the institution bears a lot of responsibility that sometimes is abdicated,
Yeah.
and and that's where the harm,
Mm-hmm.
is. That's where you feel the harm. Yeah.
No, totally. And I think, to add something to that really quickly, like another thing that prompted that for me was an acquisitions committee meeting, me and these acquisition committee meetings. But because we'll get to another one that was very notorious, but it was really sort of a light bulb, because I was like, they show up authentically. And all of the disrespect and sexual harassment and racial discrimination and lying and embezzling money, right? Tax evasion and fraud, right? Sometimes actual art fraud, right? And I was just like, this is like, and it was acquisitions meeting. It was a work by Grafton Tyler Brown, who was a Black 19th century Black landscape painter. He was actually a graphic designer and a cartographer, but he, has these beautiful landscapes. And the head of the committee, who comes from a very prominent sort of like robber baron East Coast family, right? And he's sitting there and he's just like, yes, and he studied with Bierstadt and da, 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 da. And I was like, none of that is true. Right? Like, nothing you just said is true. So, and it was like you could hear a pin drop in the room, and I was like, oh, clearly I wasn't supposed to say that. But then I was like, but anyway, so then I actually lay out, Brown's biography. And we get back, to the office. So my white colleagues are just like, Kelli, you have to be so careful. You probably offended. I was just like, so like, I don't really care. And I just remember going home that night and I was like, yo, like he spoke with so much authority because of his last name and didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And everybody in the room was like, yes. So I started calling it my inner white boy. I was just like, okay, so now I understand what they mean. Like that saying that says, had the confidence of a mediocre white man. I was just like, oh, so it was also like kind of seeing that stuff play out in real time and how authentic, and even sometimes, white women, like how their authentic presence is often very harmful, right? Very violent or very false. And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm about to be Nike and Air Maxes and hoodies, right? And ripped jeans. Like I'm about to be up in here just ridiculous and tattoos. And that was really the moment for me. Cause I was just like, yeah, like even at like their worst, they're authentic as hell. So it's like, so why am I like walking on eggshells, like trying to walk this line and trying to speak the King's English? And, I need to be this, person that I think society, right, like tells us we should be in that. And like you said, the institutions are so rigid. But that was a huge moment, when I was like, let me try this on, right? Right. Like what I actually am like when I'm not here. And like, and yeah, and instead of actually coming to work and kind of toning it down, I turned it like all the way up.
Yep.
So I'm going to shift things slightly. I'm going to ask you both to speak about the ways that you engage with community or communities in your work. I know this is something that I've spoken with both of you about separately. We've had previous conversations about this. Kelli, you've worked in several institutions in cities that demographically were majority Black cities. And Julie, you've mainly worked in a city that, while it's not necessarily majority Black, it is, I believe it holds the largest Black population in Canada. So I am operating on the assumption, which I think is correct, that building connections with Black communities are of the utmost importance to each of you. Can you speak about how you set out to build relationships with and collaborate with communities? And if you can also address the ways in which these relationships shape or inform the work that you do, your curatorial work, that is.
Yeah, like usually, my very first thing that I do, like most of the time when you start a curatorial job, you're kind of required, right, to make the rounds and try to start making relationships with donors, trustees, maybe depending on if you're a first, right, depending on if you're high enough up, in the curatorial position, you're senior curator, right, chief curator kind of thing, deputy director. But for me, coming from a working class, background, I typically stave that off and I make relationships with the facility staff and security and like guest services. Most of the time, because those are my folks, right? Those are typically like the largest those are the departments with the largest BIPOC staffs. And it typically for me, it'll start off with like, who cuts your hair kind of thing, so it's like when I'm, you move to a new city, so I need a new barber. Or, I'm a spiritual person, so I'm looking for a church, right, kind of thing. I typically will invite them, to whatever, you're the new curator, so you're doing the lecture. So I'll invite them to the lecture. That typically will turn into like, well, will you come talk to like my kids' school, right? Or my daughter or my son is participating in this community program. So I get those invitations, and instead of going saying, oh, you should come see me at the museum, I then go to like the president or the director, or, whoever is running the program, whoever's running the organization. And I say, I'm new to the city. This is my background. How can I help you? And I'll work in those institutions or in those schools or with those communities for a year, or sometimes longer, just helping them with what they're already doing. And you build the relationships out that way. Sometimes it's just like taking people to get groceries, right? Right. Who may not have transportation. I'm trying to think of other things that I've done that is like completely like, because a lot of it is like completely not like art related at all. And then, when I do build an exhibition or when I do build a program, I can say, here's this person that can be a vendor, right? For the museum, not for the museum, but like at, right, the particular program, or here's a person that can contribute in a very tangible way. This is their fee, right? Starting those kind of things. I would also take and after I share this, I'll stop here, but I would take the license. A lot of times as the first curator, typically the first curator of American art, so I would take the license to kind of like rent the galleries out, so if I knew of like a prayer group or a Bible study or like, one of the sororities, wanted to have a meeting, whatever their bi-weekly or quarterly or whatever meeting was, I would just stay on staff. I'm sorry, not stay on staff work, to be in the galleries with them. And sometimes I would be sending emails, right? Reading, doing other things. I wouldn't always, be actively participating in whatever they were doing. But a way to like invite them into the space to do whatever they wanted to do, and without having to like go through facility rentals, right? And the CFO, because that's the other thing that, traditionally white institutions will do. They'll give BIPOC community orgs the runaround or just like, make it dang on near impossible, for them to actually do things when I know, right? Like trustee so-and-so's sister-in-law's, right? Like knitting class, right? is in here every Friday with no problem, right? And so I would make those same gestures, to people in the same way that like our development officers would do and that kind of thing. And I would stay, I wouldn't ask, for security to be there, or like I said, for the CF or the COO to stick around. And when you do that to people and you kind of, you not so much sticking your neck out, but it's like, I care about you. Right. Right. So, because I also got those responses particularly in Indianapolis, where they were like, we don't fool with that institution. We don't care who you are. We don't want nothing to do with that institution. And I would say, okay. And I would still, build the relationships, like I said, just support those spaces or just to support those communities.
I have to say, Kelly, I love that you started with community from inside and the people that are working in the institution, because I am privileged to work with the VP of facilities is a Black woman, Caribbean woman. She runs that institution. Nothing, nothing can happen. I'm going to call her name without Michelle Noel knowing and supporting. So she hires majority of Black staff in that they are maintenance, and is though they are kind of we're always the first line of contact.
Yeah.
Because they're majority Caribbean folks. I'm going to come in, I'm going to say, good morning, Mr. So-and-so, and they're going to say, good morning, Julie. And from the beginning, in my kind of 7 or 8 years of working at the AGO, that has created this incredible group community of individuals who now want to come and see shows, who I invite. And I mean, it's also security. It's also the security folks, mostly brown and Black folk. And just their exhilaration and the thrill, the way their faces light up when they see, for instance, Caribbean photographs that remind them of their own histories and memory and journeys. That to me those are such important relationships. They, at the beginning, they would say, former CEO or former whatever would never say hello. And I don't understand that kind of behavior. I don't understand that lack of humility, empathy, just humanness. And so I have to say, even, the guys, the IT is headed by a Black man. And then he, in turn, hires many, young Black men and women. And so when your computer messes up, who you're going to get? Charles. Again, I'm going to call his name. Charles will come, Nigerian man, and we will talk about, whatever he's eating. And, his daughter is interested in visual arts. He calls me Doc. Doc, I'm going to get, so-and-so to come and speak with you. So that kind of familiarity.
Yes.
So it really is part of the reason that I love to come to work. There's a Trinidadian woman who is one of the maintenance staff, and, around this time or next month, we will be talking about the latest carnival. What's the soca? What's the soca for Carnival 2024?
Yeah.
So for me, it starts there. And then it branches out into the actual, communities, because then it's their families that are coming in. It's that creating that wonderful network. And of course, a community of artists and, viewers. I've been saying lately that, I am in service to a community.
Yes.
That is my job. If I, when things are getting really, really rough, as they have been recently, I think I focus on, well, who am I doing this for? And it is for those communities. And then I will do things like, I know this is recorded, but, the amount of free tickets that I offer, I mean, all in the service, because there's a little box that says, why are you ordering? Why do you want all these tickets? Community. This is like so in a way that and it's not about what's the word? it's always about relationship building
Yeah.
and um, offering. It's a gesture that, you may buy a membership one day. I know you can afford a ticket, and maybe you can't. It doesn't matter. This is
Right.
a way of um, yeah, I guess I can't think of another word. It is about building community, and it's about relationships, and not one-ofs, that we continue to build on those relationships. So I'm so thrilled that you started there, because, and then kind of, branched out, because I have never understood that. I can't speak to that person because they're the janitors, and they're the, well, without them, you're not operating. The building is not actually in operation. So actually, you should be genuflecting and, show some respect to the people that keep this place running.
Running. Mm-hmm.
And so, and several of them are, I would say, middle-aged, a little older. They need these positions.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not easy. And so those kinds of, and we don't talk about class. We talk about race. We
Right.
never
That's
talk
right.
about, though, that kind of class divide
Yes.
and what that means, and how important it is to always, I mean, that's the way I was raised. You're going to show respect to every single person,
Exactly.
right? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter who they are.
Mhm.
And as you said, in your prior answer, some of the folks at the highest level are the ones that you actually need to disrespect.
Oh God,
Actually
yeah.
have earned your disrespect.
Ah,
So
no, totally. And I always tell my students too, like, facilities and particularly security, like they're there, so a lot of times they have information that the senior
absolutely,
staff does not, right?
absolutely,
They hear things that we do.
absolutely.
And
And
I
you know
can't
what,
tell
Kelly?
you.
They have your back.
Yes, they do.
They
Yeah.
have
I was
your
gonna say, I can't
back.
tell you how many times, one of my colleagues on facilities was like, girl,
Mm,
like, da, 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 da,
mhm,
you know,
mhm, mhm.
or when things were really, really thick, for me in Indianapolis, and I had like I resigned, very publicly. People kind of know that story at this point, but the a part of that story that I haven't, or that I don't always tell all the time, is like I had to get, after I resigned. I didn't think about this. No, I'm lying. I had to get in before, so I had to get in the building to like clean out my office before I sent the email.
Mhm.
And I was like, how the hell am I gonna like get in and out, like without the COO and the CEO like knowing that I was on campus? And it was my colleagues in facilities and registration and security that like kind of snuck me in the building, like, like helped me pack up all my stuff and then like snuck me out. And so where I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure he was planning to fire me. So it was like by the time my resignation letter like hit the paper the next morning, the institution was like, what the hell is this? So it was like it kept me kind of like 5 steps ahead of him.
Mhm.
And so much of that, has, and saying a similar situation in PAFA, around just kind of getting people to the programs that myself and my colleagues of color were, were arranging and developing and putting together. It was like just knowing them, enough where they would let people in, because the administration had said we couldn't do the programming on days that the museum was open, like shit like that, you know. So I'm always like, no, you have like, yeah, you have to know those people. You can't make, it shouldn't be about a give to get kind of thing. Like they have to, and I mean, I have those relationships to this day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the summer of 2020. You didn't say it, but it was the summer of.
Oh yeah, it was.
Um, and just to recap for those who may have wiped it from their memories, that was when there was a so-called racial reckoning following the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis PD, which sparked global protests and conversations about institutional anti-Blackness and systemic racism. And this in turn led to many art galleries and museums issuing solidarity statements, increasing acquisitions of work by Black and other racialized artists, starting DEIA working groups, or by making concerted efforts to hire Black or racialized curators. And I'm wondering, and you can pass on this question, because it's kind of a two-parter, it's like hitting with all the heavy stuff, what it was like to be curating in that moment. Actually, you know what, I'm gonna move forward and you can like sprinkle that response into the next part. And then I remember at that time, or speaking to colleagues afterwards, that there was this tendency for a lot of institutions in Canada. I didn't really check in with my colleagues in the States about this, but institutions were turning to their Black and Indigenous staff to kind of direct them in their kind of responses to the moment. So Black and Indigenous staff were sort of having, or they were being asked to perform this kind of advisory or consultancy work beyond or within the scope of their curatorial roles, without the recognition that this was additional labor, like emotional and otherwise. And I'm wondering if you can speak about that, and maybe about the development of strategies of self-preservation that you may have developed in response to this.
Ooh, Sally. Where does one start? Because so much has changed since 2020. And I think our hero, Angela Davis, warned us. I remember watching obviously everything was on Zoom because it was COVID. I was watching a talk, and she said, "This is a fleeting moment.
Yeah.
Best take advantage of it now, because this too shall pass very, very quickly." And it has, and it did. I think sometimes I blocked out a lot of my memory is blocked out a lot because it was very triggering. I do know, for me, I don't know that I was curing because it was locked down. So I think I was organizing a show, perhaps maybe it was fragments, but you know, George Floyd is murdered, museum has to scramble to come up with something, as you said, alongside every other museum, inadequate as the gesture was, there was something. But I think the most insidious part was exactly what you outline, the usury of and reliance of mostly Black women, in this case, and Indigenous women, actually, to get them out of the rut, you know, to find answers. And I'm going to call their names again: Michelle Noel, myself, Akila Childs. We're tasked with literally coming up with recommendations / demands, because the institution, I would say leadership, had no clue. Sometimes it was like talking to people, like looking like dares in headlights. And so you're doing, as you mentioned, all of this emotional labor whilst watching everything playing out on your literally you're sitting here and you're watching it on TV, and the intensity and stress level was beyond, because all of that again is on you. That burden is on you, to the point. I think the thing that really pushed me over was a board member who decided that he was going to explain to the three of us what we as Black people should be doing. How,
Oh,
why what we were doing was not enough, and here's what you need to do, and started quoting Martin Luther King to us, pulling speeches. Um, the three of us then had to compose ourselves and write a very testy, scathing,
Oh yeah, he would
angry
have got cussed out.
response.
He would have
I
got
kept the
super
letter.
cussed out.
Listen, listen. I can laugh about it now, but the
Ooh.
so the entitlement knew no bounds, even for people who were purporting to be allies.
Mhm.
So all the words allyship, all of that, I don't subscribe to unless you actually are, because um, the pain, it was just so painful, I think. And I can't remember the second part of your question, because I'm going to stop now because it's dredging up all of those memories.
well,
Um, but
actually, sorry, I didn't mean
no,
to interrupt, but this will kind of give you an out from that.
yes,
It's kind of like what are the strategies? Like,
oh yes,
what
right.
did you?
Right. So thankfully, in a way, the formation of the department Arts of Global Africa and the Diaspora is still kind of bittersweet, because I'd been thinking about um, this department way back in 2017. I realized that there was a gap and a need for a department that focused on Africa, its global diaspora, but in conversation with my colleagues, so that the burden isn't only on that department, that all of the departments, all of my colleagues are thinking about how they represent in their own departments, artists of African descent. So it really did make sense. But of course, at the time I was told, there is no funding, can't commit to this right now. You know, fast forward to 2020, all of a sudden, so
Funding.
that department you were talking about, I think let's see how we can do this. So do I see that as reparations, perhaps? Do I see that, or also an opportunity to kind of move forward with this department? That kind of was the balm to, you know, um, to the wound
Yeah.
of George Floyd. It was a way to create something that was very concrete out of all of this. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's perfect. There are still the kind of internal struggles around funding and sustaining a department and supporting um, uh, the staff, and building and to continue to build um, uh, yeah, to continue to build it within the institution. But I would say that is I was glad that was kind of the outcome of um, that very um, that moment of just incredible fear and rage and um, disenchantment, I think, with humanity, um, with this certain sector of humanity. But so yeah, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to start rambling. So
Yeah, that was, oh God, it was awful. I had already, so like maybe 9 months prior, 9 or 10 months prior, right, I'd had a board member attack me in another acquisitions meeting. Kind of like your board member was saying, but this board member didn't actually, pretend to be an ally. But my colleague Shelley Salem, who was the curator of design at the time, was acquiring work by Afro-Latino potter Roberto Lugo. And the name of the piece is called The Expulsion of Colin Kaepernick, right? So Colin Kaepernick's on one side of the vase, right? John Brown's on the other side of the vase. And Shelley is doing this like, amazing presentation, right? About this amazing work. And, the board member raises his hands and he goes, it's all wrong. And Colin Kaepernick didn't do. So he went down that whole, like, what African Americans need to do, right? As this sort of like, as a Spanish, as a Mexican white presenting man from Spanish, like colonial background, right? I think he was actually like, he had some, he was like a consulate, right? So family had some kind of royal ties or whatever. And again, me being me. So I'm just like, what are you talking about? Right. That is just completely not true. Right. This is 2019, so this is, post Freddie Gray, right? Post Sandra Bland. We know the names. I'm like, what planet have you been on? And our senior leadership, completely botched that situation. Right. And of course, the outcome, the narrative was that I had acted very unprofessionally. And so then I was like, what all of you can do, right? So my boss, the deputy director, who was very supportive of me, had already started to allow me to work from home. So fast forward, to March, COVID happens, and it was great because then I was like, oh, now I don't have to go at all. And I was really hesitant, right, to kind of express to people in them first weeks, like how relieved I was, because I just didn't have to be there, anymore at all. Another sort of aspect of just how terrible, our senior leadership was, we had to kind of boycott, right? Because Indianapolis was like one of the last cities, to go in lockdown. And, he went on this, our director had gone on this whole, like, it's mandatory for you all to be here. And again, Shelley and I was like, we will not. So I don't care. LA is shut down, New York is shut down, like Indianapolis, like really, so absolutely not. And then, Breonna Taylor's murdered, George Floyd is murdered. Indianapolis does the same thing. They put the post up on the website and they're using a Black artist's work, Samuel Levi Jones. They actually co-opted my intro text that I had written, for a show that I had co-curated with my colleague Bryn Jackson the year before, right? And I read the copy and I was just like, this is so ridiculous. But I knew, I was like, they're going to get dragged all over social media. So I didn't flag, right, the mistakes, because I really wanted them to be like, because I was like, y'all are this tone deaf, makes no sense. So that happens. They, of course, are ignoring all the comments, so much so Beyonce's mother, who collects Sam's work, right? Is also commenting, totally oblivious, right, to this. And then his gallery manager called and kind of like lit into the director. So instead of the director calling his director of marketing, right, and his social media manager, he emails me. Now, I have not talked to the artist in a year because they undermined the show. So that kind of like, it put a kind of fraught strain on me and Sam's relationship. We're fine now, right? But like, we hadn't spoken. And I lost my mind, right? Because I was like, how dare you? This whole like, you shoulda and how come and you didn't. And I said, last time I checked, I wasn't making $250,000 and my name wasn't Jonathan Berger, right? My title is Associate Curator of American Art. I don't have nothing to do, right, with what goes up on the website. So that was like the first kind of straw. And I was like, I got to do something, so I knew I needed to resign, because I was like, he and I are going to be like plutonium and nitrate, right? For the rest of this time. And conferring with two of my best friends, and they were like, write an essay. So the first thing I did was I wrote my essay called To Bear Witness, where I like lay all of this stuff out. And then maybe about a month later, 3 weeks later, I resigned very publicly. And then maybe about 4 months after that, the institution begins to search for a museum director. And in the search job description, I'm trying to figure out how they worded it. One of the responsibilities, like one of the duties for this new museum director, was to maintain the institution's traditional core white audience, right? And that's what it said verbatim. So of course that blew up, right? And it was great in one way. It was horrible, but it was great for me because it was like such the vindication. Because of course they tried to play it like I was just lying and I had made up all this stuff. But there it was, right, in print from a search firm, no less, too. So like the search firm came under fire. And then from there, I think because I had already been kind of doing my little art history videos, on my Instagram page, I leaned in super hard because I didn't have an NDA, right? So when that happened, I just did like any journalist that called and wanted to talk. I did the interview, and then I leaned in and like kind of pressured the institution, and I would say in conjunction with a lot of my friends who were still in Indianapolis on the ground. And long story short, we got him fired, right? We got him removed. The institution is still a mess. Like the Black lady that they hired to fill his spot just recently was forced out by the board maybe about a month ago.
Seriously, I didn't know this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And so, for me, same thing, Sally. It was like really painful, but the kind of getting in, like taking up more of like the public kind of virtual activism helped a lot, with me like processing the trauma. And it turned into some pretty like lucrative opportunities, but then I eventually like burn out. So I burned out early last year. So for the last year, because this is 2024, so like maybe the last 10 months, I've just been like under a rock. Because it did. And it was like talking to my therapist about, how I like pushed through it, but was still carrying it. Right. So I was exhausted. Like I just stopped everything. So I like quit my job at Tufts. I came home to Detroit. I was like, I have no idea what's getting ready to happen. I don't even care. I got 3 months, of rent money and God will figure it out. And it did, it worked out, but I was just like, I had no plan other than to just sit down, and recover. And I had no, and then I started like getting chronic migraine. I got super sick. Like I was locked, in like my back and my shoulders. And so, oh my God, I was so messed up. And my my massage therapist was like, so what is happening? What is going on with you? Right. Because this wasn't a lady that I knew. And I told her, I said, yes, that's about 3 years of work, that I've literally been carrying on my shoulders, for the field, at that. And I was just like, yeah, I'm done. So I just really hit a wall, after it, because I was so determined. Because like you, Julie, I was so pissed. I was enraged because like you said, you're seeing it play out on TV. I was helping friends who were activists, so I'm bailing people out of jail. And I live downtown Indianapolis. The police actually tear gas protesters. So the tear gas had like gotten in my apartment. Like it was a mess, COVID at that. It was horrible, and so like going that activist kind of consultant route was helpful until it wasn't.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to interject and say goodbye, Elsa Robinson. She is telling us that she has another meeting to go to, but thank you for joining us. I guess I'll interject to say that self-care is extremely important, and I hate that term, like it's been co-opted, but I think it's really important for all of the reasons that you just laid out. And one of the things that I find like I kind of watched it happen in real time with you, Julie. This is going back to this kind of consultancy route. And then one of the things that frustrates me about, like I understand, we've seen it happen in real time, like unfolding over the course of this call, that people go to Kelli because she speaks truth to power, and she'll do it in this very engaging and entertaining way that is very cathartic. But at the same time, the institutions who are reaching out to you, before you did consultancy, you had a whole curatorial practice. And it's frustrating because there are ways in which I think it's the nature of both of your areas of focus where it gets flattened, and all of the subtleties, all of the multi-layeredness of what it is that you do is lost. And so I think it's really important to be, you both have mentioned this throughout, like, this is what I am willing to do. This is a hard stop for me. I learned through going through this experience that I'm not going to continue to engage in the same ways any further. So I think I have to wrap this up because I want to, I'm going to put two more questions to you. Even though I'm like, it's time to wrap things up, I'm still going to ask more questions. So what is, the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is something that you never get asked about that you wish people would inquire of you? So this could be about your curatorial practice. This could be about an unrealized project. This could be about teaching and mentorship, because I have a question about that I set aside. But I'm gonna pull into something else.
I know for me, sometimes I wish people, and you know, you guys, I'm sure you have gone through this before too, right? I think it's like such a symptom of the field. Like, I wish people asked us more about our other interests, right? Like
that was what I was
yeah, was that what you were gonna say? Oh my God. Yes, it's like everything is museums, everything is
Yes.
art, everything is race, right? Everything,
Yes.
like all day, all the time. Like, that's my whole life, you know? And I really do. It's like, I wish sometimes people would just ask you, like, well, what else do you do? Or like, what else? Yeah, you know?
Yeah. So Kelly's answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually good, because then I can sneak in another question. So actually, I'm going to give you a choice of two. So one is like, what are your hopes for the future, either for the profession or for institutions or emerging practitioners in the field? And if you don't want to talk about that, I'm going to ask you about teaching. This is the other question that I had. Teaching and mentorship are core components of the work that you both do as curators. And I was wondering if you could speak about the ways in which it's really come to form an integral component of your practice through teaching and through mentorship. And so either you can smush your responses, like you can use a response together from those two questions, which I guess I could have done a better job at like integrating them, but I didn't. Or you can answer whichever one. Dealer's choice.
I'll try to smush. Mentorship for me is key because I was mentored, and trying to always pay that forward. I think my mentorship now is less about, well, maybe it's integrated, young people wanting to get into the field, how do you do it, etc. But also mentoring the young women that have reported to me. So, younger staff or who continue to report to me, I take that role really, really seriously because it is partly protection. How do I protect you in this institution? What do you have? What can I give you to protect yourself and avoid the pitfalls, avoid, the harm actually. And so I'm very kind of aggressive about how I lead, leadership, actually, how I model leadership and model the ways in which I work as a professional person in the institution, um, and hope that something sticks, with, and it often does, because I've had some wonderful young women, working with me. I see them as colleagues, and so yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking about now about mentorship, and many of them will now they'll go on to other, institutions or independent work or teaching or whatever it is. But I'm hoping that some of which we learned together and some of which I, was able to impart, they take with them, and then, kind of play it forward. Um, and I guess the mashup is the second part. What do I, what do I wish? Uh,
Basically, what are your hopes for the future?
future, okay, hopes for the field, the future, etc. Um, I guess what I'm living now is, I think I would hope, by the time I retire, or maybe before, hopefully before, that institutions, uh, CEOs, um, become more, have more empathy, um, humility, um, grace, uh, treat people the way they want to be treated, uh, and not make it so bloody hard. Honestly, like the levels of um, the barrier making, the constantly having to navigate all of what we've spoken about this evening is exhausting. And I hope this next generation doesn't have to have it that difficult. Like, it doesn't have to be that difficult. But it's made difficult for a range of reasons, again, many of which we covered this evening. So that's what I hope. That's my little mashup, that it is about mentorship, and for those, young people to experience a different way of working, than, Kelly and I and you, Sally, and countless others have had to endure.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think my, mentorship is key. Because I had tremendous mentors. I've had really, really great teachers too, from elementary, on up through graduate school. And then I came to understand that that was like not typical, that was not the that was the anomaly, right? Like not the usual. The other thing that has been very different for me in my education, majority of my teachers have been Black. Like I can count my white teachers on one hand. Again, from elementary school up through graduate school. So part of that, was a huge part of it, like putting myself in the classroom, whether I'm the first Black teacher or the first Black professor or the 10th, for them to see. I think I like to call us sometimes like a gap generation, like we are that generation in between like Gen Xers and Gen Zers, or like younger millennials,
Mm-hmm.
that I think we bring an interesting purview. I forget, there's a like term for it too for us. There's like, we had analog childhood, but like digital.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have and it's fascinating. Like, my sister's 56, she's either 56, 57, right? And I have a 16 and a 25, year old nephews. And it's fascinating, like the role that I play, right? Not just this aunt, but as this, 43, right, year old aunt or year old person in between the three of them. And it's so helpful to me in the classroom, for future, I really do want like all the traditional structures to fail completely. I super do. And I know, like the saying goes, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, right? Right. I do. I really want the traditional structures to just fall completely apart for for your reasons, Julie, because the traditional structures have allowed them to be so unempathetic and so discriminatory and so violent, right? And so horrible. And those systems, particularly the capitalist system, are the only things that hold them up.
Right.
You know, and so it's interesting to kind of see, the dismantling that's already occurring. Just again, like, just things that are going on in the world, right? Right, that are also very sensitive to talk about,
Yep.
but are very clear, you know, and so I think it's like, as scary as that is, like I'm always kind of moved by like the blatancy of it all. Where like, so this whole time, you thought immigrant groups and Black folks and women and, LGBTQ communities were
Right.
just like making it all up, right? But now it is playing out on your device every single day, and it's so undeniable. And it has been, right, since, well, all of our lives, but it has been for almost 10 years now. We're coming up on like almost 10 years. And so it's awful as it is, I'm also like hopeful,
Yeah,
because I'm like, it's gonna have to, like, the bottom's gonna fall out, we're gonna have to build something else.
yeah.
And I was like, and it needs to. And so I just try to mentor my students in that way, where I'd say, get in, get what you need, like figure out what you want to do. Get what you need to do what you want to do and get out.
Get out. Yeah.
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 So if it's a publication, if you need your first exhibition, get the first exhibition, get out. Go do something else for a little while, and then you can go back to another, and they have more options than we did too. But like, I tell them to do that all the time too. Like, if you need a publication, like, get in and try to get an essay in somebody else's catalog, right? And get out. So now my advice is not to stay long, like no less than 2, no more than 5. Move, if you can afford it.
Yes.
Because that's the other thing, it's really hard to keep moving around like that too. But no, I'd be like, even my graduate students, I'm like, don't get a PhD in art history. Not that, that wouldn't just be wonderful, but you're not going to get the support to study what you really want to study. Do American studies, do cultural studies, do women and gender, like find the programs that are very heavy visual culture, and go to visual culture route. And not to say that you won't run into issues there, because you will, right? But art history is so rigid, and the language requirement is like absolutely ridiculous. And they're typically not flexible to, low income, right, first gen students. So I'm constantly like kind of steering people away, and now, of course, into culturally specific institutions too.
I know we've run over, but I'm gonna ask 2 more questions because they're from people who are on the call. And one of them ties into what you had just said. So we have a question from Shura Majidian, and they're asking what your suggestions on the ways through which emerging artists who are first generation immigrants and don't know many professionals in the arts community other than possibly the university that they graduated from could connect with curators and introduce their practice to them. I can hop in here. Sometimes curators do portfolio reviews. So if there are opportunities like that for you to get feedback, I know that this is something that photo curators, particularly those who are working in the States, do quite regularly. And the other thing is just, I feel like conflicted saying this because part of me is like, show your work try to participate in as many opportunities as you have to gain exposure for your work. But there's a certain point where you have to think about your time and what that costs you, and to just be judicious about it. But there are opportunities to meet, to encounter curators through things like portfolio reviews and that type of thing, or if you are still in school, they might do studio visits. Wouldn't necessarily recommend cold calling or cold contacting a curator, but I'll let the two of you speak to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say jury shows, because we get called a lot to do jury shows, all over the world, right? And so you can submit there. And I actually am a proponent, right? Because sometimes I used to have a talk about mentorship, right? I had a professor in graduate school that used to say, his mantra was like, all you need is one. And that benefited me a ton in grad school, trying to learn, after like the depths, like trying to gain depth in African American and African diasporic our history on my own, and it was like I just cold email Rick Powell, I cold emailed, Deb Willis, and she called me back like on her cell phone in a cab in New York, which was like so cool, The other thing that I would do, like in terms of that, like I wouldn't just send it out like, on blast. I would do my research into what curators are out there that you think would, because now you can search us, like we're all kind of Googleable, what are our, like, what's that curator specialization? What are they interested in? Let me see what type of shows they've done. Have they done any commissions, with any emerging artists? Do I think this person would be interested in my work? Right. So that's the other thing, it's like taking the time to do the research or to let the curator know that you know a little bit about them. Right. And you're not just saying, please show my work or please acquire my work. Because you're right. Like we're super busy, so oftentimes we don't respond to emails like that. And that's just the nature of the game. It's not like a slight, or like a snub, it's just like, oh, we just don't have time. But if you take the time, and compose an email to let a curator know that you actually like kind of looked in, to what they're doing and, or what's going on at their institution, somebody would stop, and say, because it's actually like, because it's not the email that we get, right? Or not the 50 emails, right, that we get a week, from artists all over the world.
Okay.
I don't have much to add except Instagram. I've often been reached out on Instagram with an Instagram, handle.
Message? Oh, yeah.
Well, a message and then maybe a link to artists and so you're able to kind of scroll through and see what the work is. And I think you're right, Kelly, about doing the research so that you're really the field, the area in which the curator is working. So that really helps to kind of narrow it down.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is from Georgiana Uliarek. You find power and take agency despite the institution's persistence and insistence on hierarchy and power. Do you think there are differences between Canadian art museums and those in the US?
Oh, I think it depends on the state. Because I think in some cases the Canadian museums are like are worse. I do. It's like just from the things that I've heard in the last like 3 years, because I've met a lot and met a lot of Canadian curators of color, particularly Native curator or Indigenous curators, and I'm just like, oh my God. But then I think about like the New York institutions that are just like horrific, right? And in other places, You know, the DC system is another one, you know, that Smithsonian system is impossible. So I think it really like depends on the region. I should have said, yeah, instead of state. You know, I think it depends on the region, but because I do think there are some places in the states that are more progressive. And I'm sure there are probably smaller, you know, institutions across Canada, you know, that are progressive, but the larger institutes, like all the shit that happened in Montreal last year. Was that last year?
Don't know, like
Or
COVID.
was that 22?
That was, I think that's Eunice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, that was a mess. You know, so yeah, you know, and just how long, you know, Montreal has been without a curator of color, which is ridiculous, right? Um, so yeah, I think it kind of I think it's based on the region.
What I was going to say, and nobody's like studying questions for me to respond to, but I'm taking the liberty. There's more money in the US and there are more institutions. And now it's like, why is there more money? Because they had a bunch of people working for free for centuries and they stole a bunch of land from some other people. But there are more opportunities to work in different types of institutions. And in some ways, I think I shouldn't say this because in some ways it seems as though there's more flexibility, but I don't know that there is in the States. I don't know that there actually is, just because there are more institutions. So there are different places where you can kind of find your way in. But then I also think in Canada, there are other things like I was living in the States when a lot of conversations around decolonization and indigenizing spaces were happening in Canada, and they were not happening in this US to the same extent. And kind of, I guess, kind of this, I don't want to say solidarity movements, but looking at parallels between the experiences of different marginalized groups, whether they were artists showing within institutions or curators working within them. It seemed like there was more work being done sort of across demographics, but maybe this is a fever dream of mine, but that's what it seemed like. And then again, I come back to like, there's something around the fact that Canada pays artist fees. And Kelly, you alluded to this, like so many people, not to veer into a different direction, but so many of us have jobs within institutions, whether it's someone who's performing maintenance work or curating or who's a CEO because of artist labor and their productivity and their ingenuity. And so because we have had that practice, I'm not saying that, you know, artists are treated as good as gold here, but there's something about that kind of recognition that spills over into other areas. That's what I kind of feel. But maybe I have my Pollyanna hat on right now. And anyway, okay, so you know what I'm going to do? You can respond, you can interject, but I also feel like I should wrap this up because we've gone over time. Did you have any burning thoughts, last minute thoughts that you wanted to share? No, okay. Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Julie Crooks and Dr. Kelli Morgan, thank you both so much for your time, for your thoughtful reflections and remarks. I really enjoyed this conversation. And thanks to all of you who joined in on the call and stayed with us. I hope that you will return for our next conversation in this series, which will be happening on Thursday, February the 29th. And that will feature Ryan Rice, the Executive Director and Curator of Indigenous Art at On-Site Gallery at OCAD University in Toronto, and Heather Atun, the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the First American Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
night.